Hi, I'm Julie Elliott, Career Counselor at the Johns Hopkins University Career Center. Today I'm talking about networking and informational interviews, which will include how to start those informational interview conversations, how to connect with people online using LinkedIn and Twitter, and also how to do an elevator pitch. I hope you'll join the presentation.
Alright, we're going to go ahead and start the second session. So I'd like to introduce Julie Elliott from the Hopkins Career Center to run our second session on networking and informational interviews. Julie?
Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Good. I love hearing that participation. My name is Julie Elliott. I'm a career counselor in the Homewood campus, the Career Center there, with my colleague Amanda. And I'm happy to be with you today to talk about networking and interviewing, informational interviewing, excuse me. So I have a pretty robust agenda. I know we have an hour and a half today, but I have a little activity that I want to do at the end. But I also loved how engaged you were in Amanda's presentation, asking questions. So please feel free to do the same. I'd love to have it be more of a dialogue. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of give you an overview of networking, talking a little bit how to prepare to get ready for networking. We're going to spend some time talking in detail about an informational interview and what that is. I'll also talk a bit about LinkedIn and Twitter, where to use those resources to your advantage. And then talk a little bit about networking at different events. And then what our activity is going to be is actually practicing your elevator pitch or your 20 to 30 second introduction. Amanda, we're laughing after the session that Amanda had to give an example of an elevator pitch to a student who asked a question. And then she was also asked, kind of off the cuff, to introduce herself for a video for what will be on the website. So you never know when you might need that elevator pitch, so we'll definitely talk about that. So let's just start with a really basic, what is networking? It is a way of connecting with people in mutually beneficial ways. I have no doubt that everyone in this room networks all the time. You might not think of it as networking, but you're doing it. When you ask a colleague for a suggestion about the research that you're working on, when you ask a friend for a recommendation for a movie or a place to go out to dinner on Friday night, that's networking. It's gathering information. What's also really important about networking is that you're giving information. Networking, the ideal situation is that it is this mutually beneficial relationship. It's not just about asking for what you need, but it's figuring out ways that you can also give information or referrals. I also think it's something that, related to your career development, is something you should be doing all the time. In your daily life, you're networking as you're meeting people and getting to know different organizations, networking, talking to people is sort of a lifelong process. And that it should be really intentional, too. So let's talk about what networking is not. It is not specifically asking for a job. It is not emailing a contact you have saying, I'm ready to be done with my PhD, I need a job, what can you do to help? That's not what networking is about. Again, it's about developing a relationship, building connections, and making a more reciprocal relationship. It's also not about quickly acquiring this list of names. Oh, let me see if I can get 15 people or 25 people that I'm able to talk to get a job. It's not a matter of quantity, it really is quality. As I mentioned before, it's not just about a one-way street. It's not just about what you want. So it's not using people only through your gain. Again, it's that relationship. And it's not about putting people on the spot. If you're at an event to say, hey, I'm looking for a job, I need an internship, I need more members to participate in my study for my dissertation or whatever it is. It's not about immediately asking for things and putting people on the spot to help. So why do you want to network? There are so many things that you can learn when you are networking and talking to people in the field. So you can definitely learn about different industries and company information. Get some insider information about a particular organization. Learn more about what's going on in the industry. You can learn about trends in the field. Maybe there has been some new government regulation that will significantly impact your research or your potential career path. By talking to people in the field, you'll learn about that. Maybe there's some hot new technology coming out that might be beneficial to you. So learning about trends in the field. People also network to learn about how to break into a field. I will say this probably repeatedly is, talking to people in the field, they're experts in their field. I'm really comfortable telling students, sharing with students that I know a little bit about a lot of fields. So by talking to people who are in those fields and are experts in those fields, you're going to learn from their stories, which we'll talk about too. You can also network with people to learn more about strategies for your own career development. If you're thinking about a particular career path, maybe it's bouncing that idea off of someone else that might have some different suggestions or ideas of things that you could do to continue to develop yourself as a professional. You can also most definitely use it to help in your job search. So you can find out about leads or specific employers that are hiring. As you're having those conversations, they might share something. Oh, you need to talk to my friend who works at this different organization. You can also ask information about specific openings. If you know that something, there's a position open at an organization, and you find an alum or someone that is involved in that organization, you can learn some inside information. Are there particular skills that are helpful to have for this particular position? So it could be, looking at specific openings could be twofold, just kind of learning what those might be, but then also getting some insight into applying for those positions. I also think networking is sort of the domino effect. If you meet with one person, ask for referrals, and then all of a sudden your network goes like this, right? It just kind of expands. So I always encourage students or job seekers or anyone that's networking is to ask if there are other people that you might be able to talk to. So definitely to look for referrals, or ask for referrals. So it's definitely, networking is one of the most effective ways to tap into the hidden job market. There's a pretty well-known, numbers that are used in the career field that only about 20 to 25% of all jobs are actually posted. The vast majority of them are what we call the hidden job market. But I find a lot of students that I work with spend 80% of their time looking for those advertised openings, and perhaps only 20% of their time doing some networking and talking to people in the field. And to be honest, that effort should really be reversed. So there are a lot of reasons to network in terms of helping you along with your job search. Any questions about what networking is or what it is not? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you go about kind of getting yourself ready to network and getting organized and developing contacts and how you go about making contact. So I think it's really important to establish a goal. Why are you beginning some of these conversations? What is it that you really hope to gain or learn, or a skill to develop, or why are you what do you hope to achieve by some of these conversations? Because that will help you then analyze the help that you need. Maybe you are wanting to kind of process or brainstorm a little bit about a different career path that you're considering. So maybe that's finding people in lots of different related fields. Maybe it is trying to find a job in a particular organization. So maybe it's trying to find someone that's, an alum or a contact that you have that specifically works in that organization. So definitely to give thought to what it is you hope to do, what you want to do, and then analyze those, your resources to see who might be the best avenue to pursue. It also requires you to do a little more in-depth and thinking about yourself, knowing about yourself. If you're looking for an industry information, are you able to identify what that field is and what would be information that would be helpful for you to know? If you are thinking about applying for a particular job, can you clearly articulate what some of your skills are and if those are going to be applicable in the field that you're applying for? And then with specific openings, are there things that would be helpful for you to know to apply for that job? So I think before you begin this sort of a concerted effort of networking, really think about what is it that you hope to gain and you would like to learn. But then also being aware that there's a career theory called planned happenstance, and sometimes that means just being open to people that you meet, and maybe you need to sort of think on the fly and let those experiences happen. Developing a list of contacts. I always kind of laugh about this, and I say essentially the list is unlimited, and we're going to add some of that unlimitedness, if that's a word, when I talk about Twitter and LinkedIn. We'll talk about how to continue to expand. But these are just some ideas when I sat down to work on this presentation. Like, where are people that, what are resources that you can actually talk to? So definitely friends, family, faculty, classmates, everyone else in this room, people you meet at career fairs, alumni from your undergraduate experience, from your high school, if you also have a master's, of course, colleagues here in your PhD programs, teammates. I underline hairdresser because I always love to tell this story. I used to work at a school in New Orleans, and one of my students who was a computer science major went to the hairdresser, and I'm going to make an assumption, but it happens to me often, when I go to get my hair cut, usually the stylist always asks, well, who are you, what are you doing, that kind of thing. My student in New Orleans actually got an interview with IBM through his hairdresser. You never know where those contacts might come from or potential resources. It turns out that her cousin worked at IBM and my student got an interview. I also underlined people you meet while traveling. I always kind of laugh, and I have little people in my life, so sometimes if I'm on a plane, traveling for business in particular, I just kind of want to read and do my own thing. But where else are you really sitting very close to people that you don't know for an extended period of time? I mean, certainly, brief chats at the supermarket line can, be another place to meet people. But airplanes really are this, it's people from all over the world. So again, the reason I underlined it is I wanted to tell a quick story about, I used to work at a school in California, and my director there was really, really great at networking. She was just a very, she was a people person. She came back from a personal trip and said, you will never guess what happened. I talked to this guy on the plane. We developed this whole program about how alums can help current students by donating their airline miles. Because a lot of times with, when we're working in career development is we, ask alums to come and talk to students, so we ask of their time. Development often wants to ask of their help with money. This was a way, again, my director just sort of talking on the, talking to someone on the plane came up with this really creative, unique idea. So you just never know who you might meet in sort of those situations. So be open to those possibilities. So when you're organizing your contacts, it's to really give some thought to who you are going to contact first. And I think it's okay to start with people that you feel more comfortable with. Sometimes you just need to warm up a little bit or have some practice. And definitely in the Career Center, we can be some of that practice for you if you just want to get some practice asking questions, or even going through a list of what might be some of those questions you'll ask, which we'll talk about too. But I think it's really important to be organized and to develop some sort of system for keeping track of the people that you talk to. You could create an Excel spreadsheet or even a table in a Word document where you're sort of keeping track of where you met this person, what was the contact, what did you talk about in that conversation. Were there things that you agreed to follow up? Maybe you met someone at a conference and you got talking about your research and you agreed to send them an abstract of your materials. Maybe you just remembered a great article that would be relevant to a particular person. So to keep track of what your follow-up was, and then of course if you have any referrals, if you talk to someone and they said, oh my gosh, you really need to go talk to my friend, make sure that you're keeping track of that friend and then what that connection was. I also think that thank you notes are a crucial part of the networking process. That just goes, I think, with developing those professional relationships. I have a 5th grader and a 2nd grader, and they know right now that they send thank you notes every time they get a gift or someone's kind to them. But I think, so I like to carry that on in professionalism because it's really nice. I work with a lot of students, and when someone takes the time to send a thank you note, it really is impactful. So I would just encourage you to, in thinking about developing these professional relationships, to consider sending those thank you notes. And it's a way that after you meet that they get to see your name again too. So again, continuing to build that connection. So let's talk about how you can make contact and actually visit, find people to talk to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about online ways. So professional blogs, which I think is a kind of an untapped, I shouldn't say untapped. There's a lot of possibility there with blogs, so I'll talk about that. Definitely the networking sites, LinkedIn and Twitter, we'll talk about. I like to define this sort of more casual conversations as these informal chats. People you meet at a career fair, people you meet at either a professional conference or some sort of social event, and that's where the elevator pitch will come into. We'll talk about. I personally think the goal of any networking interaction is to have a formal conversation, and that to me is the informational interview. So I'm actually going to start with that. So informational interviews are these purposeful, shared, informal conversations designed to gather and share information. So again, I underline share because I want to reiterate that networking really is a two-way street, a mutually beneficial relationship. And I also put my little plug in there that it's not about asking for a job. To me, the informational interview can be most effective when it's actually done in person or over the phone. I have definitely heard of students sending lots of different questions in an email to a contact. Actually, I had a student who was interested in brand management, and that's actually what my sister-in-law does. So I encouraged the student to reach out to my sister-in-law. I got her permission first. And the student actually emailed my sister-in-law with tons of questions. And my sister-in-law called and said, oh my gosh, have her call me. I don't have time to answer these. So there really is, it's more of that interactive component if you can actually do it on the phone. Yes, please. Sure.
Relevant information to share with this expert in the field. So what types of information would I be sharing so it's more of a give and take?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So the question was, how do I, at this point in my career, have that ways to share. So it could be a couple of different things, and it could be that if you're talking about your research, maybe it's sharing some of the research that you've done, whether it's an abstract or some of the articles that you've read and preparing for that. Maybe it is just a brainstorming idea. If you're talking to an expert in the field, maybe you have a different idea and you can offer that to that person. Maybe it is to share something that you've heard in the news or an article that you read. So it can definitely be things that feel comfortable to you. That being said, I also say this is a lifelong process. So it might be that once you're established in your field, that's when you begin to give back, and it does feel more that back and forth. But as you get settled in a career, there's lots of ways. I often will comment on someone's LinkedIn, someone that posts a discussion on LinkedIn to share a thought or a feedback, or brainstorming. Certainly my colleagues in the Career Center, we brainstorm and come up with different ideas. So just to keep in mind as you go throughout your career to think about that give and take. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Was there another hand? Did I see? Oh, sure.
I was just wondering, you mentioned about the casual informal chat. It was a person you met of some people in that conference. And I kind of started off. I found once I started with the informal conversation, and I don't know what's the proper transition to move on to this formal and very serious topic. Because we started with something very casual, and then if I start to bring up about I'm looking for jobs, and they kind of make the conversation hopefully very serious, and the atmosphere is just frozen here. So
Sure. So the question was, how do you go from a more informal conversation to perhaps this more serious, professionally focused conversation? So I think there's a couple of things you can do there. It could be that in meeting someone at a social event, or even to be honest, maybe it's at a conference, a networking reception, and maybe you do get into a more casual conversation, you can always ask for a business card and then follow up later. I think if you are, to acknowledge that you want to change the topic a little bit, you can even say, it was so nice talking to you about our summer plans or whatever, but may I ask you a couple of related, professional questions. That's perfectly fine to do too. But it might just be that you have to sort of watch, kind of see what it feels like. You mentioned that making that switch sometimes kind of shuts down the conversation. So maybe that does mean maybe trying to collect some business cards and then having that more professional conversation later. Okay? Yes, please?
Yeah, so this is a question. So I know an informational interview is not a good time to ask for a job, but if you do an informational interview, you gain a lot of great information, and that person is in contact for a job that is available.
Sure.
Right? You're using it as a resource. At that point, is it okay to, second, not in the info interview, but afterwards, be like, hey, you had a great chat, I'm really interested in this job, and enter as a cover letter resume, a response to that?
Sure. Yeah. So the question was, what if you're having an informational interview with someone who is in a hiring position or is the main contact for a job? It's perfectly appropriate to then follow up with a formal application, because just that conversation is not about the job per se. So to then follow up with that formal application, and then in that cover letter you can say, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to meet with you on X day and to learn more about the organization. And after that conversation, I'm really excited to apply. Perfectly fine to do. Does that answer the question? Right.
sorry, I just have one more question.
Sure.
You just mentioned about the meeting. What if the person I'm going to interview with, I found that person, I could write an email to me and view my profile on LinkedIn. I feel it's like a little bit, could I just go back and connect with him once I finally view my profile on LinkedIn, or I should do that?
So to make sure I understood your question, you're saying if you can, because one of the things you can see on LinkedIn is who's looking at your profile. So you're saying if you notice that someone has looked at your profile, is it appropriate then to connect with them?
No,
Sorry.
I'm going to have an interview, and the person who are going to interview me looks at my profile.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So if you have already scheduled a formal interview and the person that you are going to interview with, can see that they have looked at your profile, because again, that's one of the things you can find on LinkedIn, is it appropriate to connect with them? don't think so, to be honest. I would rather you have the formal interview and have that conversation, be able to share your skills, and then perhaps after the interview, then you can connect and see if they're willing to do that. I will say, and I was going to talk about this when we get to the LinkedIn portion, people have very different ideas about who and how they want to connect to people. I have heard people say they will actually go through LinkedIn and just kind of see whoever they can connect with. They'll send lots of invitations out. I personally take it a little bit differently. I'm actually a temporary employee here at Hopkins, so I don't know how long I'll be here. So sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant to connect with lots of Hopkins students and alums, particularly if I've only met someone really briefly, or maybe not at all, because one of the things we'll talk about is the way you can make introductions in LinkedIn. So to me, if you already have that interview, to see that the person has looked at you, and you'll see in a later slide that employers are using LinkedIn to vet candidates, to actually look at their profiles as part of the application process. Please.
I had a mentor tell me that to use the student status to try to get into the company that you're interested in, whether you get the contact through a professional organization or just go online and find the marketing department that you're interested in.
Sure.
And approach and say you're a student, that you'd like to find out more about the company, where you might fit in. You're basically saying, I'm looking for a job.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Oh, yes. The short answer is yes. That student card, to use your phrase, I think it is this entry into conversations. I think it's important to, when you're having those conversations, to say that I'm in a position to learn. So even if I decided I am done with this career stuff, I've been in the field a long time, forget this career stuff, I want to go be a biomedical engineer or something. To say that I just want to learn, I'm considering a career path. A lot of people just want to help.
Exactly. A lot of people just want to help you to at least find out the organizational structure to where you might fit in which departments to go and actually apply for a large company.
So with that, I think it's more important for you to do some of the thinking and processing about what you would be interested in doing, because then the conversation can be a bit more targeted. In learning about the organization and being able to share some of the skills that you possess. And maybe it's to say, once you come and say, I think the marketing department would be a good spot for me. Could you tell me a little bit more about what are some of the things you look for in hires in the marketing department? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. But still, please feel free to ask questions. So I do think that it should be the goal of every networking interaction to actually have this more formal conversation. So informational interviews can help you with a lot of things. I already mentioned this before, but learning from experts in the field. Figuring out ways to focus your career choice or your job search, discover skills, continue, begin to build those professional relationships in your professional network in your chosen career. I also think it can give you an edge when you're interviewing. If you've had the opportunity to sit down with someone who works at that company, even if it's not exactly in the same department, but when you are in that interview, you can say, oh, I met with Sally Smith in the marketing department, and she shared a little bit about the culture, a little bit about some of the products and services that you do. Or, I would ask a more specific and insightful question, not just that, but it can give you that insider information. Even if it's not a person you're talking to is not in the exact department. I also think it can start to give you some confidence in your interviewing skills. The more you get comfortable talking to people, the more that you engage and are comfortable doing this elevator pitch and describing yourself and your experience, that's only gonna continue to help. So let's talk about making the initial contact. Most often people are comfortable with an introductory email. I think it's important in that email to say that you will follow up with that email, because it's hard to know if that email will be responded to be honest. So indicate that you will make that follow-up phone call, and then please do. Don't put it in the email that you're going to make the follow-up phone call and then not do that. When you are sort of beginning this more targeted and concerted effort with networking, it's really important to keep things manageable. You don't want to send 15 emails out and then try to figure out how to manage 15 follow-up phone conversations and then managing 15 different informational interview times. So think, be purposeful in your outreach. When you send that email, it's a pretty straightforward description. Share how you met or were referred. So maybe you did meet them at a networking conversation that was a more informal chat. You can remind them where it was that you met. Maybe you met at a career fair and that was another place that you connected. Maybe somebody referred you to them. So maybe it was a faculty member or someone that you actually did an informational interview, or my sister-in-law, and the person could identify me. Oh, Julie Elliott, suggested I contact you. Briefly describe who you are, and so in doing these emails will also help you in sort of clarifying that elevator pitch, which we're going to talk about in more detail. To share your objective. What did you hope to get out of this conversation? Again, there's my little, it's not about asking for a job, it's about asking for information. And I think it's important to hear their story. If someone were to approach me and say, Julie, I see you work at Hopkins and there are 2 jobs available in the Career Center and I would like one of those, what can you do to help me? That is automatically putting all of the work on me. Or if someone were to say, I'd like a job in Baltimore, what do you know, or how can you help? All the work is on me. And to be honest, if it's someone that I don't know, or I'm getting this cold email, life is busy, I'm not sure I'm going to respond to that. But if it were someone saying, I see that you work at Hopkins, you have have worked at a lot of different schools, I would love to just hear your experience in the career field, perhaps what it's like to work at Hopkins, can I just hear your story? That's cake. That's easy, I don't have to think about it. And we'll talk too about, asking for a brief period of time. I don't have to think about that. I can find 15, 20 minutes on, a commute home or, during my lunch break or whatever. So I think to be genuine in your desire to want to just hear their story and hear their experience. And trust me, with those questions and how you ask them, you will learn a lot that will be immediately beneficial to you, too. And so again, to state that you will follow up. So here's an example of an introductory email. My name is Julie Elliott, and I received your name from Professor Smith. I am completing my PhD in BME. Not really, but and I'm interested in pursuing a career in regulatory affairs. I'd be interested in talking to you to learn more about your experience in the field. So right there, very clear, I'm not looking for a job, I'd like to hear your story. I will call you next week to see if we can set up an appointment to chat briefly. Pretty straightforward, right? I think it is very important to not be too casual or assume a familiarity that you don't have. We hear it more often than we would like from alums and recruiters that students are just assuming that because you have this shared experience at Hopkins or you met them at a career fair, that now you guys are buddy-buddy and, So I would much rather you be super formal and have, call me Mrs. Elliott and have me say, oh no, please call me Julie, than you assume that it's okay to call me Julie. Okay? Yes, please.
What about all that somebody emails you back and finishes their email back with Michael? It's fine to then call him Michael, or should you stick with Dr. then?
That's a good question. It actually just happened to me the other day. I was trying to put together a site visit in New York, and I was very, Mr. Kai, and I hesitated a little bit, to be honest, because it still felt a little bit informal to me. But I did respond with Michael, because yes, that's how he has identified. So it would be pretty easy for him to not have said Michael and just sort of put his signature line, and then I would have known specifically to still use the formal title. I think you can also consider how the message is written. This alum was actually super excited to help me with this program, so I figured it was a little bit warmer contact. But yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely helpful to be mindful of that. So I already alluded to this a little bit before, but to not ask a ton of questions in this email. Because if I were to get, just like my sister-in-law, if I were to get an email and it was 4 or 5 questions, I would be like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this. So basically what this email is doing is making that introduction so then you can try to find time to talk. Yes, please.
Hi, so if this is a contact that you are getting from somebody else, and you haven't met this person, instead of the last line saying, I will call you, would you want to be more polite and say, is it okay if I call you? Is that on the contract?
Well, if that feels more comfortable to you, that's fine. But that is then also asking them to respond to your email to say, yes, it's okay to call me. So maybe you choose some different words. I would like to call you in the next week to follow up. Maybe I went right for the jugular with the way I said that. So maybe it's finding, maybe a more formal or professional way that you feel comfortable with. 2 hands, the one in the back, yeah?
What about if you do a conditional, say, if I don't hear from you within a week, I'm call you?
my thought, like if it were me, and I would encourage you, as you are professionals in your field and have a lot of varied experiences, so always think back to what it would feel like for you. I guess I would still, with that, be like, I'm probably not going to call, just call me. If I got the email that says, if I don't hear from you. So, but yes, if that feels comfortable to you, fine.
You can set up could we set up an info interview in the first email, and say like, hey, when you have time, could we set up time to do this? I mean, I've done that, and hopefully it wasn't too forward, be successful. But
Okay.
So, I guess my question is, should I be doing that, or should I do what you just said? Because you're saying, I will call you next week, and generally my first email, I see all the things you did to start, and
So,
hey, we do have time in the next couple of weeks to, give you 15 or whatever minutes of time just to chat about your experience.
right, but are you giving them a specific time in the next couple of weeks? Like, are you saying, are you available next Tuesday at 3?
Normally I'm really open and I say any time next week because it's their time, it's more valuable.
Sure.
So,
And so then are you getting them email to say, oh yeah, I'm available Tuesday at 3?
Normally they go back and say, these are your 2 times, pick one. Or this is your 1 time.
Sure, yeah, great. So, you could definitely modify this to do that. It's kind of saying the same thing, right? To be open-ended, like I'd like to meet with you. So yeah, you could definitely even in this email to say, something very similar. So I guess what I would just caution is, are you available X? Because if they're not available X, you kind of shut down the conversation. And that being said, like if you're traveling somewhere, like if you know this person is going to a conference, like you can definitely be a little bit more direct in the meeting time, or say you're traveling home, wherever home is, and it's someone that lives there, you could say, I'm going to be home, I'd love to meet you in person. So yeah, you can definitely use some more, specific details. All right. So when you make the follow-up phone call, again, it's a fairly straightforward message. Introduce yourself, remind them when you called, and then to actually say, can we set up a time, or would you have time in the next 2 weeks, or whatever the time frame was, to see that if you've had about 15 minutes. I think 15-20 minutes is a really reasonable time to have this conversation. So to ask for that, let them know again that it's hearing their experience and it's a brief conversation. I think those things make it easy for someone to say yes. I will also say do not in this conversation immediately start, like you get them on the phone and you immediately start answering questions. But I would say to be prepared if they say, oh, actually I have time now, can we talk? You should have those questions ready. Okay, so preparing for the informational interview is really to do your research. Let to know, yes please.
What about asking to go to coffee?
Sure.
Buy you coffee.
Most definitely, yeah. Can I have coffee? Can I take you to lunch? Can I come by your office? Can we find a time to chat on the phone? Most definitely. Sure. Free coffee, who wouldn't say yes to that, right? So to research the organization, again, like to be able to come to that conversation with some information, with some specific questions, is going to be really helpful. To prepare those questions to ask, the next slide has several. I will be sure to share with Robert our networking handout, which has a whole page of questions that you can ask, so that'll go up on the BME site. Be ready to manage the discussion. I would rather you have 15 questions and only get to 2 than to have there be this lull in the conversation and you're not ready to ask questions. That being said, roll with the punches. If you learn something in what they have shared, change your questions and ask for more in-depth information about that. Again, you have this 15 minutes with this expert in the field. You want to learn as much as you can from them. And I would say to be ready to talk about yourself. There's a certain point where the interview is coming to the end. It's kind of clear that you're done with your questions. Someone might say to you, well, tell me about you. What are you interested in? You got to be ready to do that. And again, that's where that elevator pitch can come from, to be ready to talk about yourself and your experience and your skills and what it is you'd ultimately like to do. So sample questions. I always think that asking them about their experience is the way to go. Asking somebody about their story it makes it easy for the person to respond, makes it easy for them to say yes, makes it easy for them to do, because they don't have to prepare anything. Again, if someone were asking me about jobs in Baltimore, I'd have to go do some searching or thinking, and talking about their story is easy. But you can ask them in ways that helps you get the information you need. How did you get this job? If you were going to look for a new job, what would you look for? What are some things that you think are really important to work in this organization? What are some publications that you read? The back end is, what should I read? Is there anyone else in the field that I can talk to? What was your first job after your PhD? Do you think it was important to have your PhD? There are tons of questions you can ask. But if you're asking them for that person to share their story, you're going to learn a lot too, because maybe in that conversation they say, oh my gosh, I had to do like this interview and this interview. It just gives you some insights, and then when you're in that process, you're aware of what's going on and have some ideas. Maybe they tell you, oh, you really need to talk to my friend over here and ask about this particular situation. People like to talk about themselves. I'm actually surprised I haven't shared more stories, because I have some great ones. But people like to talk about themselves, so if you make it about them, but ask it in a way that you're really sort of getting at what are the questions, what's the information you need to know. So there's lots of different questions that you can ask to get really great information. So tips about the conversation, definitely be on time. If you were scheduled to meet or have coffee at 10 o'clock, be sure you were there at 9:55 at least. Be respectful of their time. If you've asked for 15 minutes, you need to be mindful of your watch or your clock. So when it's getting to 15 minutes, you can say, we've almost run out of time, I don't want to take any more of your time. Let them be the one to say, oh, I'm having a good time, let's talk some more, or let's get another refill of coffee or whatever. But you need to be really respectful of their time and make sure that you're not taking more than you've asked for and they've offered to give you. I think to be genuine in their desire to hear their story. You are going to learn a lot of great information by hearing someone else's experience, so be genuine in those questions. Again, to be cautious about being too casual or too familiar. Again, I'd rather someone say, oh no, please call me Julie, than you to assume that familiarity. If you're meeting someone in person, please dress professionally. That doesn't necessarily have to mean the full-on suit, but you want to present yourself as a professional. I think sometimes, I always laugh with students, particularly undergrad students, that when you're going to an interview or you're going to a career fair, you want to leave the backpack at home, right? You want to make that distinction of I'm a professional, or ready to get into this professional world. So conduct yourself, carry yourself that way, and dress that way, particularly for an in-person interview. And again, be thinking of ways that you can help them. So as you're in that conversation, are there articles you can share, or other people that they might benefit from talking from, for what their research is. I couldn't think of another way to ask this with B, but ask for referrals. So I think at the end of any conversation, it could be, can you recommend other people that I can talk to? Okay, so the follow-up again, to send that thank you note, even if you know them very well, keep in contact with your referral. So if you meet with person A and they suggest, oh, you should go talk to person B, when you talk, send person A the thank you note after your interaction. When you talk to person B, you need to send a thank you note to person B, and then you send a thank you note to person A, reminding them, like, thank you so much, this was a helpful conversation. All those little things, I think, can be really helpful in building this network. So final thoughts, again, people like to just talk about themselves. You really have nothing to lose. Again, you're asking for information in this case. You can practice, you can start with someone that you're comfortable with, so I hope that you will have these conversations. Looking at the time, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit, because I do want to talk a little bit more about some of these other fields. So, because I do want to leave time for practice of the elevator pitch, so excuse me if I'm going a little bit fast. Making contact online, so this is where we're going to talk a little bit about Twitter and LinkedIn. I always want to say, before you start connecting with people, you need to be mindful of what your online presence looks like. What are you putting out there? What are some things that either you're saying or people are saying about you? So email addresses, Skype handles, all that stuff, it needs to be professional. One of my favorite examples is an alum who's become a friend. She always emails me from her yogabrat@hotmail.com. So I know that she is a yoga teacher and has a significant yoga practice. That's fine for me, not for a professional interaction. Think about what's on your profile, like your Facebook accounts. What are you putting forward? If you have a blog, and if it's more of a social blog, be careful of how that's out there. I was actually interviewing at my school in California for a campus life position, and someone actually put their blog on their resume. I thought, well, great, let's go see what this is about. It was all about what is wrong with the United States and how terrible people are, and just this rant about, and it made us all go, I'm not sure. People can have those thoughts, but is that the level of professionalism we want, a person interacting with students? So just be mindful of that. So I think, again, if you do have social networking that you use on a personal basis of Facebook, and if you have a blog, just set your privacy standards to a way that keeps them where they need to be. I think it's also good to know what people are saying about you, so to set up a Google alert. But as I was preparing for this session, I've heard some rumblings that maybe Google is getting rid of the alert system, so explore some other ones. I quickly saw that there was one called Mention and Talk Walker. But those are sites that you can actually set up. That if someone types in your name, so if you're John Smith, that might not be helpful. But if someone is doing a search on you or something, posts something about you, you actually get an alert to that. So it might be something to consider. Let's talk a little bit about professional blogs. More and more companies are developing their online presence, but they can be options for you to find people to talk to. So I just went and grabbed a couple. So Deloitte has a blog. They're talking about Deloitte perspectives, and each post is by a different person, and at the bottom of the post it talks about who that person is, what they do, and the couple I saw most recently actually gives their Twitter profile or Twitter account. That might be somebody that you can engage with, that you can actually talk to. Blogs depend on how they're set up, but some blogs have where you can actually comment. That could be another way to engage and start developing contacts. GlaxoSmithKline had one that had different posters as well. Professional associations. So the Biomedical Engineering Society has a blog, and it was actually just one poster who was putting different advertisements and different articles and things like that. But again, based on those comments, that could be a way to engage or find new people to talk to. So I do think that can, is perhaps an untapped resource to find other people that might be doing things that are really interesting that you want to learn more from. Another resource to find them. So let's switch gears and talk about some of the networking sites. So this is a survey from JobVite. It is their social recruiting survey, that they do every year. And these, while the numbers have changed, the order of them hasn't. So LinkedIn, it might be hard to see that number, but 94% of recruiters are using LinkedIn as part of their process for finding new hires. For Facebook, it's 65%, and for Twitter, it's 55%. And there are all these sites in the corner. Other than Instagram, I'm not really familiar with a lot of those, but this is just an interesting resource to see what are recruiters using to find people that they're looking to hire. What I thought was interesting, though, getting a little bit more into the survey, and I know that these are really hard to read, so I actually made a very big copy for myself. Looking at the breakdown of the top 3, LinkedIn is really focusing, the recruiters are focusing on candidates. So they search for candidates, contact candidates, keep tabs on candidates, vet candidates pre-interview, which was sort of your comment about you saw someone was looking at your profile, and they post jobs. All of those, according to the 2013 survey, are above 90%. Facebook and Twitter seem to be more focused on the company. So for both of those sites, showcasing the employer brand is the top one. Generating employee referrals and posting jobs are the following 2, although in different orders. So the top 3 for both of those other sites are really more about getting the word out, not necessarily about finding people. And then they also, with Facebook, are getting candidates post and pre-interview, and then Twitter does that as well. So I share that information with you to say recruiters are out there. I have actually had a master's student I was working with a couple weeks ago that said, well, LinkedIn is not working for me. I said, really? What do you mean? He's like, no one's contacting me. I do think that you get out of it what you put into it. Did I say that right? You get out of it. Yeah. So it could be that he was just, put his profile up and then did nothing. So I do think it can be a very valuable resource in your job search. But today we are actually talking a little bit more about networking and how to find people to talk to. So I will, yes please.
On the LinkedIn, and there's other places like the service too, you can pay to have
Yes.
your account,
Yes.
your
Yes.
visibility, or whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
What do you think about it?
I think it's worth the investment, to be honest. I do. I think, that there's a job seeker profile. Do you have a different opinion, Don?
Yeah, I think the premium LinkedIn is really for recruiters. The LinkedIn site I was here last week says students really do not need to do that.
Well, but there are job seeker different access points. So sometimes you can buy like a 3-month.
But you didn't see the jobs anyway. I get alerts from
Sure. But there's also the in-mail capacity, so we can actually have more direct conversation with them. So different opinions. So maybe explore. There's a lot of stuff that you can do without the premium, and I actually get advertisements quite frequently to do a 3-month trial, and I actually have not done that because I want to make my experience on LinkedIn similar to students who don't choose to buy that option. So I have to admit I don't have a ton of experience about what the level it gives you, but to me the more the in-mail, being able to contact people might make it worth the introduction. But definitely Donna has talked to recruiters and heard something different. So yes, please.
Can you talk a bit about how much detail
I'm sorry, how much detail?
you should include on our profile in terms of
Yes, for Twitter or for LinkedIn? Okay, can I hold off on that a little bit? So yeah, I have a bunch of slides on that. But I wanted to say with Twitter, and I'll be honest, I don't use it a lot in my professional interactions. I think, again, that comment about you get out of it what you put into it, you need to be mindful of that, right? I just find that it's too much to try to do Twitter and LinkedIn, in addition to my job and my family and all that other stuff. So I think it's really important to figure out what is the right balance for you. But I do think with Twitter as well as with LinkedIn, it's really getting beyond those social networks and again trying to get those informational interviews, so there's more formal conversations. So a couple of tips with Twitter. I think it's important to create a profile with your real name because that really gives the professional edge to it. If you want a separate account where you follow celebrity gossip or whatever else you might do on Twitter, that's fine. But if you're going to use it for professional uses, it really should have your full name and then have a summary of your resume to give them a sense of who you are and what you have to offer. Links, tweets are a way to build a presence. So again, just as you would in a networking conversation, maybe you share articles, you share, you ask for advice, you try to start conversations. I think building your presence on Twitter just takes some time, right? There's so many people on it, and it's trying to find a way to make these meaningful connections. You can retweet with someone else. If you're following someone, you can retweet their link, their comments. That's a way to sort of develop relationships too, is if you're giving a shout out to someone who's posted an article, and maybe that's a way that you sort of warm up the contact, and then you can begin to engage, maybe in a longer conversation, with that. So you can definitely find people to follow. There are a couple of directories, Twello and WeFollow, are a way you can actually search for people. You can certainly search for people by their by their name or their email address too. You can follow companies. Again, I think I had Deloitte on the brain when I was putting this PowerPoint together. So again, I could not think of the exact title. I knew they did sort of a day in the life, so I just did Deloitte and Twitter. And they actually have several accounts where they do lots of different things on Twitter. I also just, to give you an example of a lot of them actually have, Twitter profiles specifically for jobs. So AT&T had one that they were just posting jobs that were available throughout the country. So, definitely find people to follow, and as you develop those relationships, they'll begin to follow you. But again, I think that the goal is to find people that you're interested in connecting with, that have an experience you want to learn more from, and then figure out a way to actually have that more formal conversation. In Twitter, you can interact with people directly by replying them. That says, hey, I'm speaking to Robert specifically. You can also direct message them, which is a more offline way to contact. But I think you just need to be mindful of this too. Again, in doing some research, Twitter says that if you post more than 1,000 tweets a day, that's the max. You can't do any more. That seems ridiculous to me. I can't imagine having time to send 1,000 tweets. But knowing that Twitter is using that as their mark, it seems to me that there's just a lot of activity on Twitter, and it's important for you to find a way to make it meaningful and develop those connections. Tweet-ups are ways that different employers do them and different social groups do them to actually meet in real life. So those can be great opportunities, again, to expand the networks that you have. As I mentioned, I don't use Twitter a lot, so I did some research to be able to address some of these questions. So WikiHow, which I know it had a lot of great information, so that was one resource that I looked at, and then Social Media Examiner, 8 Ways to Network on Twitter was another good resource, and I think Mashable has lots of amazing articles too. So let's switch gears to LinkedIn. This is an amazing resource. I mean, it sounds kind of dramatic, but I say that I've been in the field 18 years, and I feel like this has really changed the way that I do my work. Back in the old day, you always had to go to the campus, the campus database, the clunky database to find people, to connect, to connect students to find alums, excuse me. Now you can do it all yourself. I use it a lot with undergrad students or anyone that's not quite sure what they want to do, because you can actually follow, search career paths, and you can kind of see where someone has gone. Because very few career paths are, you start at A, you go to B, you go to C, and you get to D. So being able to actually see real life examples of career paths. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. I think LinkedIn is amazing. So can definitely begin to build those networking skills, research companies. There's a lot of things that you can do. So let's talk about the profile. Again, I think having a picture on there is important. I don't know about you, but when I'm looking at LinkedIn and I see this sort of the blue image, I'm like, I don't really want to look at that one. I think people just in that desire to connect, they want to see who they're talking to. So I think a professional photo is really important. The headline, I think, is an underutilized spot on your profile. It's 120 characters, and I like to call it a prime real estate. Your header is what shows up when someone searches. Most of the time, it will default, if you haven't created a header for yourself, it will default to what your current job title is. So it would say Career Counselor, Johns Hopkins University. But this is 120 characters where you can control the message you're putting out there. So maybe you want to say, innovative researcher focusing on X. I don't know, it's Friday, sorry. But think of ways, and you can actually look at other people's profiles, see what other people are doing. And I always say that, and actually with the summary, I think that too. Look at other people's profiles. What are they choosing to share? How are they choosing to share? What are some of the words that kind of resonate with you? But I definitely encourage you to explore that and think about how you can use that 120 characters, because that was what will show up every time that you come up in a search. So the summary is 2,000 characters of just blank space. So you can do whatever you want with that. Again, I think to look at people that have profiles that that you respect in the field, or colleagues that you enjoy working with, kind of see what they're talking about. It's a way to give a summary of your experience, to highlight what your skills are, what you're interested in. And again, it's this space that you can really control the message. So the question about how much should you put on your profile, someone's looking at it, I would put your whole CV on it. I don't see any reason not to do that. Now you might want to think about, maybe reducing some of the description so that someone's able to scan it in a relatively concise way. I don't know, sometimes I look at profiles myself and I'm like, scroll, scroll, scroll. Because I want to look at where they went to school, or I'm trying to show a student if you need a master's degree to do that particular field. But I see no reason not to. If you have someone looking at your profile, take advantage of that. So I think you can put the vast majority of your resume or CV on site. The skills section is one that is that LinkedIn gives you some options, so that you can actually put things that you think you're talented in. So resume writing, networking presentations, right? I can go add that maybe. Career development, I would add things that are really relevant to me. And what's interesting about that is you can actually see the list of things. So as you start typing, strategic, fundraiser, other words might come up that have that similar, the similar key, the letters, excuse me. So it's a really great way to sort of think of how you can encapsulate some of your skills in a really easy to see way. Endorsements are, I don't quite know what I think about endorsements, to be honest. They're really easy to do. They're actually, every time you log into your account profile, I don't know if you've seen this, someone's nodding in their head, like maybe you see at the top it says, well, should you say that Donna is great at career development and Robert is good at networking and putting events together. It's too easy to click. I'll tell you, several years ago, the first endorsement that I got an announcement for was from a board member. And at the school I worked at in California, I was so touched, I was so amazed, like I crafted her this email, and she was like, I don't really remember doing that. Oh, right? Like it's just, and I think what happened was it was that real easy thing in the beginning, and she probably just hit the yes, because it's 4 or 5 people usually. So all that to be said, I'm not quite sure what recruiters think about that, but I will tell you one of the things I do is if a friend or contact acknowledges me for a skill, I will be sure to go back and do that to that person. I don't do sort of the blanket, when I check my profile and I just hit all of them, but I do want to, give back. Recommendations, however, are another thing. When I was moving from California to Baltimore, I got in touch with some people that I respected in the field and that I wanted them to speak for me. So I actually, on my profile, have a former supervisor, I have colleagues, I have students as well as alums that, wrote a real brief, just, their thoughts about me. And of course, I asked people that I knew were going to give me some props. Just like you would with letters of recommendation and applying for school, you want to be mindful of this. Like, you don't need to email 13 people. Think about their time and what they can actually say about you. But I think that's a real good strategy because, again, if someone is looking at your profile pre-interview, not only are they seeing what you are offering and what you're putting out there, but they're hearing somebody else's opinion. So I think you can use that strategically. So just a quick mention of the home and the status bar. So the home page is where you can, see all the great things happening with people. If someone's celebrating a 5-year anniversary at their position, if someone got a promotion, and of course where people are posting articles and things like that. That's one of the ways I think to sort of get more comfortable with networking is you can, post a quick message to say, oh, hey Gail, congratulations on celebrating a 1-year anniversary, or if someone posts an article, you can make a comment. So I think to look at that home screen. Sometimes I find when I'm, really busy in life, I just go right to sort of what I'm searching for. Sometimes I kind of forget to look at the home page, but don't do what I do. Like, spend some time on the home page, daily or at least every couple of days. And then there is the status bar, where you can actually, you can post the article or you can make a comment, you can start a discussion. And it's not a status bar like in Facebook where you talk about what you had for lunch yesterday or things like that. Again, it's really professionally focused. Just a couple of things about searching and how to use it. So you can definitely, on that search field right there, just type in the name of the person you know. So I'm calling Robert out. I put him on my screen. And Robert actually had a pretty unique spelling of his last name, so he came up right away. But you can always go to the advanced search, and you can use all of these fields as a way to find the person. So if you're seeking out someone specifically, and again, just like that list of networking contacts I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it can be anyone, hairdresser even, if that's applicable for you. Because one of the things that's the beauty of LinkedIn is it's based on degrees of separation. So if you and I are connected, you essentially have access to all of my connections, or access, a warmer connection. It's a second-tier contact for you. But I use the advanced people search all the time. It could be finding someone that works at a particular company. It could be saying, oh, I'm going to move to Boise, Idaho, and I'm going to try to find people in the field in Boise, Idaho. There's lots of different ways to use it. So definitely, as you're considering, finding people, you can search by industries. That's one of the options, both current and past companies. Yes, sir.
Do you find this a nicer way than email to ask for that information?
Do I find this a nicer way?
Instead of sending an email blindly, go through there and send a message.
That's a really good question. I am. And I'll look to my colleagues with the PDF. They haven't, I don't know, actually. What happens with me in LinkedIn is that I don't spend a ton of time in it myself. So when I get an invitation to connect or someone messages me through LinkedIn, it comes to my email anyway. So I don't know that I have a strong opinion about whether that's a better way. But then what happens if I want to reply to it is I can actually just hit reply on the email that comes into my inbox, and then it then sends me back. So I don't know, do you have a?
I use that as a preliminary step if I'm connecting with someone for the first time, maybe they're a second connection. I'll send them a LinkedIn message, but then I will ask them for their real email if it's not right on their profile, and then take it off and email them directly.
I would say that might be required too, because the character room is limited to bigger documents with LinkedIn, so you'll be able to ask for the full information on your call in that process.
Sure, and we're going to talk about the little message. So, one thing I wanted to point out, like I love LinkedIn, I don't know if I've made that clear, but I think it's a really great resource, but they tweak it all the time. So I will tell you, as I was preparing for this presentation, when I found Robert, I hit the connect button, and I don't know if you saw it, Robert, but it automatically sent an invitation. I had no opportunity to send, to edit any text. And so I thought, well, that's weird, maybe there was some glitch, so I did it again. I'm like, wait a second, what's happening? happening here? So I think I sent out invitations just kind of randomly because I just wanted to get the screen that I'm going to show you on the next slide. And then finally it was someone at work, and so I sent that, I did it, and then I emailed her and I said, what did it say? And it sends what I'm going to tell you, encourage you not to do. So what I would suggest, and I just found this out earlier this week when I was prepping for this conversation. So maybe it was a bug, who knows what. But what I would say is actually go to the person's name, so you're actually looking at the profile. And then when you hit the connect button, then you will see what I was trying to get the first time is the text box, or where you have the opportunity to send something. So in the world according to Julie Elliott, I would actually say that this personal note is required and that it should not be the information. Because if you can read it, it says include a personal note is optional. And then it says, I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn. I hate getting those messages, to be honest. You know, I've been in the field a long time. I was at the Scripps College for 13 years. I love hearing from alums. And if I get this from an alum I haven't talked to in 5 years, I'm just not happy. Because I want to know, what have you been up to, you know? So I really think it's important to use this space. So if it is someone that you don't know or that you're trying to make those connections, this is essentially an email. And I guess I didn't think to look how long the character length is, so I appreciate you offering that. But I think that you can actually, in this email, if you can do it briefly or concisely based on the character limit, to ask for that informational interview, I think you can do it. Because again, when I talked about before, some people might not choose to connect with you because of their own sort of personal philosophy about how they, you know, what they do with their LinkedIn network. But again, it's essentially giving you a chance to email someone, because if you're not connected with them, you can't see any contact information on LinkedIn. So I think that box should be used to your advantage. Okay, another thing you can do in LinkedIn is actually get introduced. So Susan works at Quest Biosciences. I don't know her, but you can see from the option that I circled up there is we have 2 shared connections. So if I were to say, okay, forget this career stuff, I want to get into biotech, what I could do is actually, I try to circle it big, but next to that connect button, there's actually a drop-down menu. One of those options is to get introduced. When I click that button, I get this other screen that pops up that says, okay, Julie, you know Lori and you know Professor Eisenberg. They are connected to Susan. So I can actually click on one of those names, and then I can actually send a message to, let's say I have Lori, because she's a career colleague. You know, maybe I say, oh, Lori, forget this career stuff. I want to go be an engineer. And then it can actually, I'm asking her to forward to her contact on my behalf. So it takes a second-tier contact and makes it even that much closer. Okay? So I'd encourage you to use this as you're continuing to expand your network and trying to meet different people and connect with different people. This can make it a warmer contact to use that spot. Make sense? Okay. One of the tweaks LinkedIn has done that I really like is this new alumni search page. So you can see from the tab, there's home, profile, network, jobs, interest. If you tap on the interest tab, you can see the education section. When you click on the education section, it will ask you if you want students or alums. I actually go right to alums most often, and then you can actually type in Hopkins, and then it will give you this information. You can see there's 68,000 alums that are in LinkedIn. It will tell you where they work, what they do. If you click on more, it actually gives you companies that they work for. It's just a really great way to find alums, Hopkins alums, and narrow that search down. So when you are, in that search, you can search specifically for the biotech industry. You can type a name of a company. It really, I think, makes it much easier to find, Hopkins connections. So again, one of the tweaks I really like and actually use quite frequently with students. Let's talk about groups. I think groups are just an amazing opportunity to meet more people, get involved in discussions, continue to expand that network, learn about industries. I mean, I feel if you did nothing else on LinkedIn and just groups, I think you would still learn a great deal. I don't even know how, I should have looked, I don't even know how many groups there are, but there are groups for everything. So I actually, I joined a group about slow food. Sometimes the groups will be, they want to approve your membership. I have joined so many random groups, like trying to show students how to do it. women in sports media and think tank. I have joined so many groups. I've never been denied a group. Now, I don't know if they see that I'm a career counselor, maybe it would be helpful. I've never been denied a group. But there are tons of groups. There are groups specifically related to, looking for jobs in industries. There can be, there are probably groups specifically for PhD students in biomedical engineering. I mean, there can be, there's groups about everything. So I would encourage you to join groups. When you're joining the groups, you can see so under slow food, you can see the tabs as you can actually, there are discussions, there are promotions, there are jobs specifically in there. So again, as you are in these groups and you can hear these stories and listen to the questions that are read the questions that are being asked and then participate in some of those discussions. Again, it's just ways to bring that network closer to you. One of the other tweaks they did that I don't really like, but I figured out how to get around it, and oh, my circle got messed up. It's circling LinkedIn. That's not what I intended to circle. I wanted to circle the number of, 31,218 members. It used to have a members tab. That went away at some point. But if I click on the number, it actually brings me up this other search field. And these are all the people that are in the group. So I just did a quick search for food in Baltimore. And it came up, I don't even think it gives me, it's hard to read that number, 89 maybe? I can't read that number, sorry. But these are people in this group that I'm also a part of that then I can message because, oh, again, it got messed up. What I meant to circle is under Chad, you can see, so it says he's editor-in-chief News Magazine in Qatar. So I don't know why Baltimore came up. I can follow him, I can see his activity, but I can send a message. So that's what I was trying to, I apologize for that. That's what I was trying to circle. So just because we have this shared group membership, I can email this person, I can message this person. Right? That just knocked your network out of the park. Right? I did want to point out that through the Alumni Association, there are some specific groups that might be of interest to you. So, a biomedical device and biotechnology career network. So I would encourage you to look to that one specifically because there is the Hopkins connection. But again, there's groups, you could go create a group if you wanted to. There's tons of groups out there. So I do think that this can be just a really helpful tool to connect with people. So I've already alluded to some of these, but you can follow companies. So when you're doing your research about companies applying for jobs, you can follow them. So again, on your home screen, you can see what they're posting. It might be articles, it might be posting jobs. The gentleman in the back made reference to the fact that you're getting alerts for some jobs, so there is that job function. And those can be either within groups or just across LinkedIn. And again, what I probably use it for a lot with my undergrad students is exploring career paths, like kind of learning, people in different fields, what are their backgrounds, what are the skills they're putting on their website, on their profile. So lots of different things. So LinkedIn etiquette. Again, I think it just kind of goes back to that, being a bit more formal, being more professional. So, even though it is described as a professional networking, like just to have, proper grammar, respond to those connections in a timely fashion, those messages. Again, I mentioned this, be intentional about the recommendation request. That status bar is not the same thing as sort of more of a social status bar or update bar. And then be honest in your profile. I know Amanda alluded to the fact that some of the articles, some of the news stories about people that are not being truthful. If you're keeping your privacy settings open, and most people do at LinkedIn, someone can easily find incorrect information. So I feel like I'm speeding through because I do want a chance to practice a little bit. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to go a little bit fast about just some quick tips about when you're making contact at events, or networking events, or social events. So I'm just going to go right into this. When you are arriving at an event, and these are really nice name tags that were already printed for you, I think. If you have to print your own name, be sure that it's easy to read. I don't know how many times I've met people at networking receptions and I'm like, all right, I guess I'm not going to just call you by name. Because as you're meeting lots of people, what you also want to do is to remember their name. So that just makes people feel warm. I see it all the time with my students. If I, as we're talking, if I use names, I almost feel like they pick up a little bit. Oh, maybe they heard that a little bit better because I use their name. So to think about that name to make it easy for someone to read. If it is something that you're going to, if it's a conference presentation, a conference networking reception, think of a strategy. Who are the people that you want to meet? I presented at the Society of Engineering Alumni mock interview event I think it was last week. And all of the alums, before the event got started, introduced themselves. So what I would do if I was really working that event, I would make sure, okay, who do I want to meet? Oh, that person was wearing a blue sweatshirt or sweater, I'm going to go make sure to find him. You know, have a strategy if it's an event you know you're going to. When you meet people, it's the elevator pitch, and we're going to talk about that. So the small talk, you know, again, remembering their names, I think to invite people into the conversation. So if you are, you know, sitting there talking one-on-one and you see someone that's by themselves, maybe you try to introduce them. Or if there is someone else at the event that you think it would be great to make an introduction, you know, feel free to do that. You know, I always kind of laugh about the topics of conversation, right? Like, you know, thinking about that blog story I shared the other day, you kind of want to stay away from those touchy subjects if you're in that social situation. Because even if it is a social situation, these are potential contacts for your career path or your career development, so you don't want to be ranting about what's wrong with the U.S. government. If it's an event, you know, a networking reception where there is food, you know, it is a tricky thing to sort of balance the plate and the glass. So just think about what you're ordering to, you know, what you have. And I've been at events with past hors d'oeuvres, and I'm like, really? Like, that's a 3-bite thing. It's hard to take 3 bites in a professional, like, polite, kind way. So just to think about that. And I also think with alcohol, I mean, it seems silly to say it to PhD students or graduate students, but just think about that and how that can impact your performance at the event. So the departure, I think, again, to respect people's time. Like, if you get a chance to, you know, have a great conversation with a well-known person, and you see there are other people that want to talk to this person, kind of what we talked about with the career fair, you definitely want to get your point across and make that connection, but don't hog their time. So think about how you can be respectful and depart gracefully. So again, I think that's to ask for business cards, you know, and be able to know how to excuse yourself. Again, that could be making an introduction to someone and say, oh, I'm sure you have a lot to talk about, thanks for your time, and you can walk off. You can always use the, I need another appetizer, you know, there's ways to beg off. So again, just, you know, tips for that event, and have that firm handshake, be ready to ask some of those questions, be confident, show enthusiasm, and move around. I think sometimes, particularly for those of us that might be a little bit more introverted, it's kind of easy to say, oh, I've made this connection, I'm just going to stay and just, you know, stay with this one person. But I think I would say to challenge yourself. If you know that that's your natural tendency, maybe you say, okay, at this event, I'm going to try to talk to 3 people. You know, give yourself small goals. All right, sorry, I have 15 more minutes, and I want to, so I apologize for going quickly. That elevator pitch. 30-second introduction, so that you are ready to introduce yourself, talk about yourself, and begin to develop start a conversation. So I think it's important to be able to quickly identify who you are. You know, and I think these 3 questions or 4 questions are things to think about. You know, what can you do? What is your experience? What is it that you want that person to know? Is there something that you need? What are you looking for? And then I think to ask that question, so of can you, or you know, might you be able to, or think about what you want from that connection. Again, going back to one of my first slides about how you actually you know, be strategic about your needs and what you might want. So it really is, you know, the 30-second, if you think about moving up and down on the elevator, and it's not this long information, you know, it's not this long speech, it's this really concise, how are you going to introduce yourself to someone, how are you going to get your point across. So a couple of examples. Hi, I'm Julie Elliott. I've been a career counselor for over 16 years. I'd love to encourage my students to use LinkedIn as part of their career development. Do you have any tips and resources you use with your students? That would certainly be appropriate if I'm at a career conference and want to continue to learn from people. Using a similar description from the introductory email for an informational interview. I'm Julie Elliott, affiliated my PhD in BME at Hopkins, an internship in regulatory affairs at Bears this summer solidified my interest in the for a career in regulatory affairs. Would you be able to offer suggestions or organizations that I could explore for full-time opportunities? Right, so it's this quick, here's who I am, here's what I need, here's what I want, and how can you help me? Okay, any questions about an elevator pitch? Okay, good, because now I'm going to have you do it. Okay, so we got 13 minutes according to this clock before lunch. I do want to say, you know, maybe you challenge yourself at lunch to sit with someone you don't know so that you can continue to practice your pitch. Or maybe you, and what I was going to do if we had more time is I was going to try to give lots of different opportunities to practice. But what I would like to do is have everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. I want you to find someone you do not know and do your elevator pitch. Okay? So before we start moving, take a second. Remember what the questions were. I am, I need, I can you? Alright, so maybe you take a little sec, maybe move around a little bit. I know you guys have been talking, sitting for a long time. Maybe we need to get those juices flowing. But take a minute, think about what your pitch is, and then I want you to walk somewhere else in the room to find someone, or if there's someone at your table, that's perfectly fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a minute and a half where I want one person to introduce themselves first, and maybe in that conversation, in that question you ask, you have an idea. The person that's who's introducing you, maybe you have an idea. Maybe it is to say, oh wait, you might want to talk to my sister-in-law, like my example. So I'm going to give you, about 30 seconds to do that, and then you'll switch so that the other person gets a chance to practice. All right. So when you're ready, go for it. There's sort of this like lull of, oh, who's going to start talking? But there's still people talking now. So what I'd like you to do, now keep standing, is I want you to find someone else. So let's get some movement in the room. Go find someone else. And again, both sides will get a chance to practice. So find somebody new, please. jamming in. If I can get your attention. I almost don't want to stop all these great networking conversations. All right. I would love for you to take advantage of the lunch hour and try to do that a little bit more. Maybe there'll be some other opportunities. With just a few minutes left, I did want to ask, does anyone have any other questions? So you can go back to your seats. Thank you so much. I feel like you guys all did a great job. I mean, I could watch some of the interactions. There were a lot of smiles. There were, some in-depth conversations. The one thing I would encourage you to think about, though, is more handshakes. As I was watching people engage, there wasn't a lot of handshaking going on. So just something to think about as you're meeting people, that is a very professional way to introduce yourself. I think it's important to be cognizant of what your handshake is like. I actually will have students in my office shake my hand several times. I used to also live in the South, and so sometimes that really, we would call it the Southern lady handshake, would drive me crazy because it would be that sort of half handshake. It's important to think about what you're putting forward, and you also don't want to do like the death grip squeezing, but I think a firm handshake is really important. It's a good way to make a good impression. So again, with a couple minutes left, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. I'm also happy to stay around for a little bit and answer questions individually, but if there's anything else that anyone has for the good of the group, yeah.
I guess as we add people to our LinkedIn network, are there any particular strategies that you recommend to maintain the quality of those connections?
Yeah, good question. So going back to that idea of creating a log and creating some organization system, you might want to say, well, try to keep track of when you've interacted with them. Depending on how big your network gets, I mean, once it gets to 300 or 400 people, that's hard to do a lot of individual interactions. But again, I think in LinkedIn makes it easy, particularly if you're seeing on the home screen some of the anniversaries or promotions. Again, I think those can be some real easy ways to maintain those contacts. Again, if you see a post that someone that's part of your network, maybe it's a quick, this was really helpful, thanks for sharing. So I think there's some little things you can do. And again, I think it's that home screen that can really be helpful with that too. Yes, please.
So you suggested that we have a elevator speech.
Yes.
But I'm the kind of guy that will feel awkward about talking about me for 15 seconds. So would it be better to have an elevated conversation?
What was the last part? What did you say?
What about having an elevated conversation planned properly rather than an elevated speech?
Well, I guess it will depend on the circumstance. Sometimes if you're literally in the elevator with someone, you don't have very, very long. I think just, we had some examples today. I'm using my colleague Amanda, that she actually, somebody asked how do you do that at a career fair, so she had to sort of come up with a quick introduction. So I think to continue practicing, I hear your point of, that sometimes it is really hard to speak about your strengths and your abilities and talents. But I always kind of put it back to say, someone's not going to hire you based on, they can't see. You sometimes have a lot of undergrad students that say, well, if they could just see me, they would know that I'm cool and can do the job. But that doesn't happen, right? So it really is. And then so even like with your resume and your profile, it really is about highlighting your accomplishments and telling someone how good you are. So while the elevator pitch might stretch your comfort level a little bit, I think just to continue to practice. So to take opportunities to practice. And so again, I think over lunch could be a great way. Was there another? Yeah?
So the thing is, it's not about me getting out of the comfort zone. For the listener, if I just keep on speaking for 15 seconds, won't that be awkward?
Won't it be awkward? I don't. Well, what do you think? What were some of your reactions if someone was, in the examples? Did anything feel awkward? No? Yeah?
There could be 1,000 times that you're going to talk for 15 seconds, and it shouldn't feel awkward to you. I don't know. I mean, that's confidence that comes from practice, but lots of people talk to us for 15 seconds, and I think 15 seconds is 2 lines about yourself or 2 lines about what you do. I think that's okay. I think if you're talking for 2 minutes, that's
sure.
Right?
And if it's awkward and they don't want to help, I mean, what have you lost? 15 seconds? Maybe 30? So yeah, I mean, to me, meeting people, I totally get people that are, certainly that, those of us that are a little bit more introverted, that does feel really, really awkward. So maybe it is you practice with friends, and maybe you before you go to an event. So I guess I should apologize for putting anyone on the spot. And, doing that exercise felt really uncomfortable for you. But I feel like this is a safe space, and we're talking today about how to do it and how to network. But maybe it is. Maybe it's finding a friend and you guys go to coffee and you just practice and talk with your friend just to get more confidence and experience in doing that. Yes.
I was wondering for this kind of advice for information that through our experiences. I went to one that was very, very helpful, but it went for a very, very long time. The person was very excited. They got very helpful. On a story about, which was all interesting.
Sure.
Like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And so, and I was trying to bring it back to the questions I wanted, but what's a good tactful way, besides the things that obviously come to mind, that keeps reoccurring and kind of focus the interview on, more relevant to what you need as opposed to training or
Yeah. Do you have something that?
A line that I would use in that situation is, the reason I asked you this, and then take it back. But you've got to do that.
Yeah.
Even if it's somebody who's really high up the food chain, you've got to step in and take it back. They're just doing that to you.
Yeah, and part of it is managing the conversation. You had some goals, you had some things that you were hoping to get from the conversation. So yeah, I might start using that, Donna. That's good. The reason I asked you this. Yes.
So could you elaborate a bit more on the ID and can you items in the outline above? So I guess is the point forward to inject the other person into the conversation to make it less, I guess, one-sided?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's why. And I was trying to hurry at the end there, but yeah, that's why I think it's really important to ask them a question, because that is a way to engage them in the conversation. So to think about, and it could be like I've said, for something specifically you need or you're looking for. If it does feel more comfortable, at least as you're getting started with this, maybe then the question is, well, could you tell me a little bit about your experience? So I think part of it is the asking is to get that conversation going. Most definitely, yeah. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your questions and letting me push you a little bit to do that exercise. Again, I'm happy to stay around for a little bit if you have any other questions. And again, I've been putting the challenge out there. Maybe over lunch you try to find maybe 2 or 3 other people you could practice with. So thanks so much.